right now on Higher Journeys Radio with Alexis Brooks. When one thinks of alien abduction, one might be tempted to have a very straightforward idea of what that entails. Extraterrestrials forcibly taking innocent people under their control in order to achieve a specific outcome. But what if the abduction phenomenon is far more multifaceted than one might think? Who is actually pulling the strings when it comes to this elusive phenomenon? Is there a human element involved? Are humans and non-humans working in collusion when it comes to so-called alien abduction? And just what is the agenda? Are alien abductions connected to artificial intelligence, transhumanism, or something even more dark and covert? These are some of the questions I pondered along with UFO researcher and historian Richard Dolan. This is not your typical interview, but rather a conversation that without question took us down the proverbial rabbit hole like never before. Have a listen. It's been a little over a year since we've had you on the show, Richard, and I know you've been keeping quite the frenetic pace these days. But, I felt it was time to have you back on to share your insight and, of course, your stellar research with all of us here at Higher Journeys. So thank you for graciously taking the time to join us.
Hi, Alexis. I always enjoy our chats, so thank you for having me back on again.
Lovely. Wonderful. Well, listen, I've been keeping count of the number of times you've been on our show, and this marks our fourth chat together.
Oh, wow.
Can you believe it? I think the first one was in 2015. We were talking about the idea of ET encounters of the humankind. Mm-hmm. These are stories that you shared with us of individual accounts that you'd personally taken about individuals who had their own crazy odysseys with possible non-human entities that look human. And then, and I've heard you tell those stories a few times more, but I got to tell you, I think ours was the best because you just,
it could be. Yes,
it was you really went into a lot of detail there. But then we met up again in Maine, I believe in 2016. And we were talking about the history of false flags. Remember that hot day?
I do remember that now. I've forgotten all about that. Yeah, Portland.
We're both wearing sunglasses and apologizing. Like, we're not just trying to look cool. It is really bright out here. I remember that.
Yeah, but the sunglasses were cool, let's face it.
That was fun, too. Oh, but, speaking of the false flags, this is a subject that you have been bearing down on in recent years. So I maybe want to touch on that before we go off.
Yeah, I need to get that one done.
Yeah,
yes,
you sure
absolutely.
do. Yeah. But then back in 2017, just a year ago this past June, we met up at Contact in the Desert to discuss this ever-growing phenomenon of AI, artificial intelligence, and the implications it may eventually have on all of humanity.
Oh, yes.
So, yeah,
yes,
we've covered a range of stuff. But today, I want to go into a subject that has no shortage of contention, speculation, and mystery, and that is the alien abduction phenomenon.
Great.
This aspect of the UFO mystery never gets old for me. What about you?
No, it's really true. And thinking about the whole alien abductions, it's worth remembering. I mean, it is, to this day, despite the fact that it's ubiquitous in our popular culture. I mean, everyone talks about alien abduction. We all know what that means. But there has never been agreement on even whether it's happening among researchers. And even in the first couple of decades of UFO study, 1950s, 1960s, it was not even considered an issue at all. I mean, no form of contact, with very few exceptions, was considered even possible or happening. Mm-hmm. So it's taken a long time for this to come out, but the reality is that there have been a number of accounts of individuals who have had apparent, we'll say, encounters with non-human beings, and a large number of those have apparently, I'll say that again, involved being taken without their permission or against their will. Mm-hmm. There are a number of cases where people have claimed that they would come upon a landed craft, beings outside the craft who would then ask them, would you like for us to take you on a trip? This has come up quite a few times. And sometimes individuals report that they say yes. Sometimes they have reported that they've declined. And, these are stories that circulate around in our culture, and it's hard to prove or disprove them. But That whole part of it's out there too. But the whole abduction element, it's been very, very significant in UFO research, really since the late 70s, early 80s, and it's established itself. It's there, and it is contentious, as you said.
Very much so. You know, they say there's never anything new under the sun, but as far as the so-called alien abduction phenomenon is concerned, do you think there is anything new, or moreover, anything new that's been discovered about alien abduction from your perspective?
That's a good question. There's a recent study that just came out by the organization Free, and that was associated with the late Edgar Mitchell.
I know them well, yes.
And Tracy and I just got the Free study in the mail, and I have to say I haven't read it, but I want to and will. But that is an analysis of several thousand people who have had or have claimed to have had encounters with non-human beings. And so what they've tried to do is, I guess, as methodically and carefully as they can, run some numbers through and find out, what's actually going on. What does this large amount of data have to say to us? And one of the things that they have been promoting about in their findings is that I think something like 3/4 or between 2/3 and 3/4 of all the people who've had experiences with these other beings have reported them as basically positive. So that might be something new. I mean, when we think about alien abduction, we tend to think it's negative, it's traumatic. We think of researchers, the pioneers like Bud Hopkins, Dave Jacobs, who have in their work always focused on the traumatic aspects of alien abduction. And let me just say, I've interviewed a number of people who've had apparent alien abductions that have been traumatizing to them as well, not fun experiences. But nonetheless, the Free study has a different conclusion, at least for many of the people that they've indicated. No, maybe it's positive, or at least the people are reporting that it hasn't been that awful, and that, in fact, many people would want to have it done again. They would want it taken. So whatever that means, again, this is a brand new study. It just came out within the last month. So
I'm aware of it. I'm so glad you brought up Free. By the way, people know we talk about Free all the time. In fact, I'm sort of not an ambassador, but a friend of Free.
What's their acronym? I'm trying to remember what it actually stands for.
Well, I'll tell you. It is
Foundation.
The Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial and Extraordinary Experiences. They actually made it longer. And I've botched that one so many times. It's interesting. They actually added the extraordinary. It used to be Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters, but based on this study, what the sort of epiphany that they had is that there are extraordinary experiences, I should say, that fall outside of the realm of the classic abduction or contact phenomenon. Right. And that's really about what they're doing now, is cross-correlating other phenomena like out-of-body experiences, near-death experiences, shamanic experiences, remote viewing, with the contact phenomenon. So, we could talk about Free for a while. We could, they just came out with this fabulous book.
Hopefully they won't add another E to their acronym.
I know, right? They're actually going to keep it as FREE. I said to Ray Hernandez, who I just had on the show, you're going to add another E. It's like, nah, but yeah. So anyway, that's great. That's a fantastic thing. And I'm glad you got that study. I think that's going to be chock full of great research for you. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I think I'll be diving in pretty soon. Right now, just it's interesting, and I don't want to get too sidetracked. This is more related to our interview a year ago on AI, but I've been delving back into transhumanism, just in part because I'm giving a lecture at a transhumanist event in a couple of weeks in Branson, Missouri, and this has been a good opportunity for me to look at that phenomenon and any relations, that it might have to the UFO phenomenon. Does UFOs have anything to say about it? Not sure if we want to go in there, except here's one thing as it relates to abduction. It occurred to me that when you're dealing with the alien abduction phenomenon and the existence of hybrids, or at least, again, we'll say alleged existence of hybrids, alien-human hybrid beings, that if that is true, that is explicitly a form of transhumanism. Like very explicitly, it's a form of beyond human. When you're dealing with, high level of genetic science, taking a human being and mixing that genetics with another species or another being that gets you into a form of transhumanism. And if that's so, people in the transhumanist field might just want to be apprised of that and see what data can be found in that phenomenon.
Boy, you're going down a rabbit hole, dude. You just don't waste any time. Just a thought. Can we just stay right on this? Because first of all, I think you took some of the words out of my mouth, because I was about to talk about sort of this confluence of AI. I'll never forget the chat we had on AI. In fact, I'm going to make sure we have a link so folks can go back if they haven't seen it.
Yeah, that was a fun conversation.
That was, yeah. And if you recall, I was really trying to get you to go into where there may be a nexus or some interrelationship between artificial intelligence and non-human intelligence. So it sounds like you may have given that a little more thought.
Mm-hmm. Could be.
Okay.
Could be, yeah.
Well, give us your thoughts.
Well, I've felt for a long time, a very long time, almost since I broke into the UFO field many years ago, that what we're dealing with in terms of this intelligence of UFOs has got to have a relationship with artificial intelligence, with advanced artificial intelligence. Like, there's no way, logically, in my opinion, that it can't. If we simply look ahead in our own society, the next 10, 20 years, only 20 years down the road, and we see where we're going to be with AI, probably having strong, what the experts call strong AI, or general, I think it's general AI, that can essentially think for itself. And if not 20 years, then maybe 50 years, however long it takes, it's going to happen. And so then I thought, well, if there's another civilization that's gone through their own computer age, then good chance that they've achieved something similar, their own version of strong AI. And if that is the case, they might have been able to go through their own version of their trans species development, transhumanist, that is genetically modifying themselves, maybe for space travel, or maybe for interdimensional travel, or maybe modifying themselves so that they could function here on planet Earth in an effective way. I mean, after all, presumably they wouldn't be from here, so maybe their resistance to viruses and bacteria would be lower, or maybe they would need to modify themselves, to deal with the solar radiation or gravity, or who knows. And so they would need to go through their own sort of trans species science. So that, in other words, I've hypothesized just to myself for a very long time that these other beings, they're probably not naturally occurring. They're probably the product of some kind of very, very advanced genetic modification program. And then when you get into, looking at our own future in total immersive virtual reality, whether by entertainment or education or just living out a fantasy, being a millionaire celebrity in some virtual reality, all of that will be connected to a cloud, presumably, right? All of it's going to be cloud-based. And that means not only will your brain be connected to that cloud, but that cloud will be connected to your brain. And now we're getting into a future of humanity where we're going to be looking at a potential beehive type of psychology. I mean, for real, like I could easily imagine people, because in a world where economic opportunity might very likely just get worse and worse and worse for many, many people in a highly, highly limited, restricted, bureaucratized, legally restrictive environment where you can't really just go off and be free the way maybe people used to, but you can perhaps in your virtual reality. And so I think we'll see a lot of people living within VR types of situations for many, many, many hours every day. And in that situation, if you're in interconnectivity with all these other people all the time, what are your thoughts, and where's your sovereignty is a really interesting question to ask.
Absolutely.
And but then back to these other beings, are they dealing with a kind of cloud, like in Star Trek's The Borg? Are they dealing with a kind of beehive mentality or cloud connection where they're all part of a collective? And is that where we are moving? I actually believe that is where we are moving. I think we're moving into a collective type of a consciousness.
No question. You're asking some really, really deep questions. And as you're sort of describing this potential future, which I happen to think is a little closer to the present than we may know, I can see sort of this trajectory playing out. Again, before we went on the air, we were talking about going on a news diet because it's literally making me sick. I'm really tired of it. But as a journalist.
News diet, and can we just say a little bit of local gossip in our field?
Yeah, that a little, just a little.
We'll leave it at that.
All of it. I think I'm going to just go outside and watch birds. Anyway, but in all seriousness, in watching this sort of trend of foisting elements of AI on the unsuspecting public, which is clearly happening. I say unsuspecting because I don't think they know the bigger agenda by and large. Yeah. You know, it's been talked about, first it was, in terms of devices, let's just say, first we had what are called holdables, which are your cell phones and your, whatever, your iPads, etc. Now we're seeing more people with the wearables, their Fitbits and all that good stuff.
Yes.
And
absolutely.
next it's going to be the implantables, which totally I think true. Are being, that this is being not only looked at and piloted now, but people are, at least in some other countries I've heard, are willingly being implanted with chips to be able to open the door at their job, etc. So everything you're mentioning, Richard, I'm seeing the sort of what has been called what is it called? Not totalitarian tiptoe. I'm stealing from David Icke here. Maybe it isn't the totalitarian tiptoe.
Well, it is. I think it's literal. I think totalitarian is actually a really perfect word for what we're looking at, because when you think about what is totalitarianism, it's a form of government that seeks to manage the totality of your existence, like right. Everything.
Absolutely.
There's no part of your life that is untouched, that is managed. And I mean, totalitarian could be horrible and brutal and violent and bad in that way, or totalitarian could be more benign but equally controlling. It depends on the face that it has. So,
right.
But we're definitely moving in that direction, and the real question is, how far down will we go, and will we stay down that way? Those are all these other questions, and the technologies that we're exploring right now and developing, like a train out of control.
You said that before. Train out of control. You sure did.
So yeah. By the way, I know we were going to talk about abductions, and if people are listening, I don't want to disappoint them. But while we're on this whole area of technology, one segue with abductions is the whole phenomenon of alien implants. Uh-huh. And I'm just bringing this up because I think, first of all, I think that the phenomenon of alien implants is definitely real and legitimate. And I do firmly believe that the work of the late Dr. Roger Leir was instrumental and really correct in the details that he uncovered. And I just want to point out, Roger Leir, when he was alive, he extracted you would think hundreds of implants, and it wasn't that amount. It was like a couple of dozen implants, I think, from people's bodies over the years, to my knowledge. But he wrote a paper on this, and I think it's on his website, and he gave a lecture on this at the National Press Club years ago, and that's on YouTube. And he did it in conjunction with a doctor named Alex Mosier, who had a PhD in physical chemistry, I think. And so Lear extracted these, and Mosier did detailed analysis of the implants. And what Lear had said is, if you were to take all of these implants and put them on a surgical table, they would look identical. And they did a detailed analysis of, I think, a couple or maybe even just one detailed. And what they found is that this implant gave off, aside from the fact that it was very difficult to handle, it almost seemed like it was resisting being cut. He mentioned that, but it gave off a radio frequency, and it gave off the frequency was in an exact range of 14.7 megahertz. And I'm mentioning this because that's actually, it turns out, that's a very effective frequency that is used in the U.S. for low power, short range use, like for RFID, like a data tag. So in other words, this is a chip that sure as heck seemed like it's a chip to identify who you are, basically to give all the information like an RFID chip would give to an item in a warehouse inventory, So anyway, I guess the point is that these implants were highly technological, and beyond that, you would think, okay, well, so maybe we're just some black budget group is creating these chips and putting them in people. I guess maybe, but the way they described the manufacture of these were of a level of sophistication that is off the charts,
Yeah.
like highly, highly sophisticated. And they talk quite a bit about this, quite at length about it. So it's entirely possible that if they're human manufacture, we're talking about a very, very advanced, decades or generations advanced black budget group that's taking people and shipping them, or just as conceivably to me, a non-human group that's taking them. And indeed, the reason I think it is a non-human group actually is that a large number of the people that had these implants taken out by Roger Lear were those who said, I think I had an alien abduction experience.
Right.
And this is what I remember. So they've got that memory, and then they've got this implant. He takes the implant out, and boom, it gives off a radio frequency, and it's got a lot of other physical properties about it, which were very, very unique.
Mm-hmm.
And so there you go. I mean, I think the alien implant phenomenon really requires more attention, and it's unfortunate that Rogers passed away. I still remember how awful I felt when I learned that he died. Mm. But I believe that there are other people carrying on his work. I don't know who these folks are, but we definitely need more work on this because it's a critical part of the alien abduction phenomenon.
Yeah, very well said. I know that Mary Rodwell, who I work very closely with, had worked as well closely with Roger Lear, and I think speaks about his work in her book, The New Human. As I'm listening to you describe this, Richard, I'm just thinking again, it just seems that everything that we're not postulating, but sort of putting out there as a question, it seems that the lines are so blurred between what is alien influenced and what is non-human influence versus human influence. And there is truly an interrelationship, a partnership, if you will, this is the big, huge question. To what extent, forgive the term, are we in bed? Are some humans in bed with non-human intelligence in this sort of grand collaboration? That's the thing that is, to me, quite disturbing. It's a big question, but it's very it's disturbing to me because
no, it is. Well, here we're speculating. We have to speculate because I don't know, and I don't know anyone who actually really does know. There are people who claim to know, but I don't feel that we have any real knowledge of this. But I would say that it does seem to me that a large portion of what we call the UFO phenomenon is not from our civilization. It's not from us. It's not from human beings as we know them. And, with enough eyewitness accounts of short gray alien beings, tall insectoid type beings, tall reptoid type beings, and even, a wide variety of human like beings that look very human, but that some are very, very tall. Some are similar in size to us, but there's a lot of variety of those as well. Anyway, with enough of that testimony, I think that there's a non-human element to this phenomenon that's been going on for a long time. But I also think that within our own civilization, that there's been a covert, a clandestine, secret, within militaries, within the intelligence community, groups that have been studying this, and which I've often called a breakaway civilization, to the extent that they've developed science and technology that have allowed them, based on the exotic tech that they've been studying, they've developed their own versions of it, and that's allowed them. So they're another factor in the equation. So we've got these other beings, and then we've got our own attempts to replicate, duplicate, and I think some of those are incredibly advanced as well. So we don't really – it's one of those things where you go to a really complicated sporting event and you don't have a card to identify all the players. It's really tough to know who is who. Yeah. Even now, I mean, you and I have both been delving into this in our own way for many years. I've been in this for 25 years. And
a lot longer than me. Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, and there's folks who've been in it longer than me, and it's difficult – really to say, I absolutely know. I know this, I know that. And I can't get to that point. I'm not there yet. But it does look to me that we've got non-humans that are in this mix, and that there are humans in this mix, and that there's a relationship between the two. And I would have to say it's at least a realistic consideration to think that there are some humans who are in a relationship with these other beings in one way or another. I mean, There's enough of these stories that I've tended to credit. One was by Dan Sherman, who wrote a book called Above Black. And I don't know if you're familiar with that. He's been out for a long time. And I want to reread his book again. I've got a copy in this house. But he talked about working with or through NSA, and that there was one very, very small communications group within that was charged with communicating with these non-human beings. And I actually found his account of it to be credible. I can't say that it's proven, but and then there's a number of others where you get this idea that we've gotten a communication with them. There's one story, excuse me for coughing here, getting into remote viewing, which some people will say, oh God, where's he going now with remote viewing? But I think remote viewing has had enough of a track record that we can take seriously some of the better and more established ones. So one was a man named Pat Price back in the 1970s. Price famously walked into the office of Dr. Hal Puthoff at Stanford Research Institute, and he said, just so you know, on my own, I've been doing some remote views of alien bases on planet Earth here. And he said, there's 4 that I've identified, and they were all 3 were in mountain ranges, and 1 was out in the west of Australia. One of the ones in the mountain ranges was he said, a place called Mount Hayes, Alaska. So he said that had explicit protection from the United States government. Like you can't go there, you can't see it. So that implication, and for me, Pat Price was legendary in his abilities. So it would imply that that this base, this non-human base, has enough, at least formal protection from the U.S. government that there's connection there. And then you've got stories coming from an old retired Air Force colonel with high-level clearance named Ernie Kellerstrauss. Linda Moulton House talked a lot about him, and Air Force Captain Robert Collins, who's out there every now and then, he knew Ernie Kellerstrauss. But Kellerstrauss in the 1980s led a little group of people. It became known as the Aviary. People have heard of the Aviary. But they would basically have a number of insiders who were interested in the UFO phenomenon just to get together privately and talk about what they knew. And Kellerstrauss apparently had knowledge of what was going on out in western Nevada. Under a formal government control, these lands that just go out forever. But there was one area where the rumor was that these were managed by non-humans, and you better not go out there alone because it could be very dangerous for you. But that the U.S. government knew all about it and couldn't really do anything about it. So every now and then you get these stories, and they leak out, they come out, and skeptic can easily just say, just a story. What do you do with it? But the thing is, like, they're not all coming out from crazy people who are clearly you need to watch out for. Some of them are really coming out from very, very stable individuals who've got genuine careers, and so I'll take them seriously, and I think a number of other people do too. So that's a long response to your point about, is there a kind of collusion between us and them? And I don't pretend that I know the answer, but I would say that there probably more likely is than isn't.
Okay. I think taken together, Richard, as we look at all of the history of these sorts of stories that you told, I think you'd have to be just completely in cognitive dissonance to dismiss everything out of hand. I'm kind of over people and that attitude. So we won't. I'm not going to go off on a tangent there, but let's keep going down the rabbit hole, because I think these are things that people want to hear, and I think they deserve conversation. Let me tell you about this really disturbing account that I recently heard. Account of a woman who's known as Alyssa E. Alyssa E. You all out there in the Higher Journeys audience may know the name. She's been pretty vocal in terms of her own abuse as an MK Ultra victim and ritual child abuse. But among other things, this is something that I recently heard her say, among other things she brought up in this conversation was a very disturbing scenario about being in the process of, she had gone through a deprogramming, fortunately, to learn about her abuse and her alters, et cetera. I mean, this is really just complex stuff that I had no idea how multidimensional it was. But as she's going through the deprogramming, she discovers that along with this insidious abuse that she had experienced from childhood, she also began to recall what she believed were alien abduction encounters, many of them, in fact. So when she said in some, was that she, along with some other victims she'd spoken to, believed that their abductions with non-human entities were in fact screen memories for a much darker and malevolent agenda that included ritual abuse with humans. This is tied into what we're talking about here, this collusion, or this, again, blurring of lines of who's instigating what and what's really going on here. I'd love to get your thoughts on that.
Well, the whole idea, the whole reality of satanic ritual abuse, or I think it's often just referred to now as SRA, that's real, and it is, of course, deeply disturbing. There's a reason, increasingly, when you look into the science of mind control, that satanic ritual abuse is actually as widespread as it appears to be, and it does appear to be widespread. And the reason is that it's really effective. It's really effective in traumatizing and breaking a human mind so that you can then program it and use it for your own purposes later down the road. And I mean, this is a horrible thing to say, but it appears to be true. Like that, this is why a lot of individuals who have clearly no ethics, no scruples, will do horrible, horrible things to young children to break them in such a way that they are then, you can split off multiple personalities that are available, after due to code words and things like that, just like in Manchurian Candidate. Like that's exactly true. Yeah. And so ritual abuse, or the satanic versions of it, are very effective in breaking. And think about even the phrase ritual abuse. Like, so if a child is in such a situation, they have no control. They are absolutely powerless in the face of really the most terrifying reality that just keeps going and going and going. I mean, I have no vocabulary to describe the depth of depravity and terror that someone must go through when they're experiencing ritual abuse or satanic ritual abuse. So it's just hideously awful, but it is effective at creating the effects that the perpetrators want. And conceivably, and here's where my knowledge really kind of ends. I can't pretend that I'm some kind of expert at it, but it would appear that it should be possible to create a belief in an alien abduction when it didn't happen through enough trauma and abuse. If you want to hide some other activity that you're doing and blame it on the aliens, I would imagine that's conceivably that could happen. I don't know that that's the case. I mean, and here's the other thing. You can't use that to explain more than probably a small handful of alleged alien abduction cases, because the vast majority of alien abductees that I am aware of are not victims of ritual abuse. So most of them, you can't use that as an explanation for saying, well, you saw aliens because they mind controlled you and abused you. Well, most of these people are reasonably well adjusted and do not appear to have been subject to that. But ritual abuse is a real phenomenon, and this goes way, way, way beyond anything connected with the UFOs. I mean, this is such a widespread. All you have to do is spend a couple of days, weeks, months, years on YouTube and go through all of the accounts that are out there. It's just
it's really something.
Horrifying.
Yeah. I want to toss something out, Richard, before I lose my train of thought here, and that is, and your point is well taken in terms of correlating. It's not a 1-to-1 ratio, certainly, but it occurred to me as you were explaining that dynamic. I mean, let's think about, and I'm kind of thinking about the Free Study, as a matter of fact, and the type of profile of individuals that tend to be have a proclivity for paranormal experiences, and there's a range of sort of impetuses, if you will, for perhaps why, intergenerational being one. But I'm thinking of someone who has gone through this, again, insidious, heinous world of being ritually abused over and over and over again. And again, as you so aptly mentioned, one of the one of the goals in this is to be able to break or compartmentalize the brain in order to be able to store certain bits of information in one part and some in another for malevolent reasons, obviously, as an agenda. But these people, it would seem, would be more susceptible to all sorts of unusual phenomena based on their being so compromised in their brain.
I think I agree with you. In fact,
including alien abduction, real alien abduction.
Tracy and I are looking into a case rather quietly right now. We're not really publicizing it, but where it appears to be a case of some form of ritual abuse was engaged against an individual who then, much later in life, seemed to gain access to some very, very interesting kind of information through, I'll say, unconventional means, but whether psychic means or something else going on. And we're looking into this data, and so we have to wonder, all right, so did the ritual abuse cause fantasies to develop where this person developed certain knowledge? But it appears actually that this individual may not have been developing fantasy knowledge. This actually could be genuine knowledge. And so what is that all about? And one possibility is that the damage that occurs to someone psychologically could actually open up possibilities for them to learn things.
Right.
And this is a horrible and very controversial thing to say, because someone could say, well, you're just justifying ritual abuse. And no, I'm not. I'm not justifying ritual abuse. That can never be justified. But it is also possible that one of the results of ritual abuse could be an opening up of these types of capabilities. And in fact, this is an old idea. This goes back to at least the 1960s. The Esalen Institute, of all places, out in California, explored back in the early 60s the idea of trauma providing a gateway to higher knowledge, if you can put it that way. So that take that down wherever it goes. So it's entirely possible that there's truth to that, and that one of the human mind it's very complicated, right?
Absolutely.
And if you damage it enough, you don't destroy it, you just simply damage it and really screw it up, and you screw up someone's personality for the rest of their life. But you also might be able to get them to be able to do things that psychologically stable and healthy people would not be able to do.
Right.
So it's again, I think people listening are realizing this is not an endorsement. In fact, I think anyone who submits ritual abuse upon someone else should be, really severely punished by our society.
Yeah,
it's a horrible thing. But the results could be very complex and are much more than just destroying someone's mind. You could actually be creating certain capabilities.
I agree. Oh boy, this is a big one. Again, every time I hear you say something, it prompts another thought in my mind. I mean, we could take the reverse of that, Richard. And in fact, I have heard cases of individuals who have been sort of targeted for certain programs, let's say MK Ultra, but targeted, not plucked out of nowhere. There's always there's a reason for a particular child. One of which I have heard is that they are tested as being higher than average psychic ability, which means they have a natural propensity in this direction. So again, what I'm seeing is some kind of there's some sort of parallel here between this horrible lifestyle, if you want to even call it that, this hell that these children are put into, and this idea of being sort of a sponge or magnet for paranormal phenomena, including alien abduction. The more I think about it, I guess maybe I'm answering my own question. I don't know. We're just throwing it out there and kind of tossing it out there to discuss.
Well, yeah, there's a lot happening here. Let's put out a hypothesis. So let's just say that way back in the 1940s and maybe early 50s, the United States government and maybe other governments were aware that other beings were here from elsewhere, and they could not control these other beings. And moreover, that these other beings had a very powerful form of telepathic communication, which I think both of those things are true. I think the U.S. government knew about these other beings, and I think they knew that these other beings had a telepathic capability, very strong. So if that's the case, then it would become a priority for that government to cultivate as many psychically advanced warriors as it could, because you would need them. Like, they would be incredibly valuable. So you would go out of your way to comb the nation, comb the world for kids who seem to exhibit these capabilities or have promise of those capabilities. So that gets you into the whole idea of the secret school phenomenon, and is that real? And I think that is real. I myself interviewed a gentleman. I know this guy really well, and was as honest as the day is long, and I know his partner, and he's one of a number of people that I'm actually aware of who, as a young boy, seems to have been taken, seems to have, and not abused. He was taken by what could very well be a human group, or a very, very advanced human group that was testing him for psychic capabilities. And I say human group because all he can remember is that they had military boots and military. He couldn't see above the waist level. He couldn't see what they looked like. It's a very odd thing. He was like 5, 6 years old. He was a little kid, way back in the 50s, going way back. And but they would have him and these other little children sit around in a circle and testing with these balls of different colors to see if they could telepathically move the balls across the room. And they would test it. Here's, try the yellow ball and try the green ball. And he said to me, and no one was able to move the red ball. So there were different types of balls, and then for him, the tests just stopped, and he was not brought back. They didn't bring him back. So maybe I would assume maybe he flunked the test. I don't know what it was with him. But seriously, like if you're scoping the population looking for candidates, that would be one thing you do. Let's just say that's true. So I think that's true. So then you've got a group of kids that you're training to be psychic warriors, and maybe you don't want them all to know what they're doing. So now you've got to get into some covert stuff, and you get into memory management and mind manipulation in one way or another. And that technology, I think, absolutely does exist, like the ability to inhibit formation of memories as you're experiencing something. I think that's a science in itself, and it's very, very little discussed, but I think that this capability does exist. So you can, to a greater or lesser extent, imperfectly, but you can really manage someone's memories pretty well, enough anyway to get what you want. So let's say that's the case, and now you go further and you're figuring out a science of increasing psychic capabilities of someone, and that you might, maybe one of your German scientists through paperclip would say, we've got some really good trauma-based conditioning methods we want to run by you. And you're like, oh, wow, this works really great. And so you begin doing trauma-based conditioning of some of these kids. Like, all of that could be really possible. And you could just say, well, it's for the greater good. We need them for such and such work. Now, maybe that's not what they're being used for. But maybe they'd be used for other things. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the sky is the limit with some of these. But then you've got a whole problem of keeping secrecy on these types of programs. And
right.
But the thing is, with satanic ritual abuse, here's the thing. This is something that has been going for a very, very long time, and up until the last, let's say, 5 years or more, has been pretty much below the radar.
Absolutely.
Like, it's been very widespread. So in a sense, the secret has been kept very effectively. And what are these people doing? It's come out in Britain, it's come out a little bit in America, and probably elsewhere, that these satanic groups, they exist, and they do horrible things. And they've gone for decades and generations, and no one
has known.
No one?
No one. Which I find that's really this really should be the theme of the show. Maybe we come back and do another show and really focus in on this one, because it's deep. And I was saying to you and Tracy both offline, I found myself sort of looking into this a bit more. Have not covered it. I think this is probably the greatest extent I've gotten into the subject, but it needs to be talked about. This how ubiquitous it is, and how interestingly it has gone under the radar for so long, and yet that seems to fly in the face. If it is that common and more prevalent, how can it be kept secret unless the people that they think they're keeping the secret from are involved in it? It's real. Exactly. That's a conundrum. It's a real conundrum.
There's a book that came out about 25 years ago called The Franklin Cover.
Absolutely.
You're familiar with this? It's
of course
Franklin,
I am.
I think Nebraska, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
I could be wrong.
Boys Town.
Middle of the U.S. Yeah. And that was implicating, I think, high-level members of the local Republican Party, if I'm not mistaken, engaging in pedophilia, ritual abuse, really deeply disturbing, scary types of torture to young people. And it's not a partisan thing. It's not like only the Republicans did it, but in this particular case, they were looking into high-level Republican Party operatives that were involved. And then that whole thing just got hushed up. It kind of went nowhere. But that's an interesting story. So I think, it's in the U.S. It's definitely in the U.K.
It's global.
It's in Europe. It's elsewhere.
Absolutely. All right, I'm going to reel this conversation back in, because we're going a little down the rabbit hole. We may not be able to get back out. So
they're like, what about abductions?
What about abductions? And again, I guess I opened that can of worms, because it's always interesting to explore the correlations. But let's bring in a mutual friend and colleague we both know well, Grant Cameron. I want to talk about a talk that he gave some time ago that I attended. It may have been a Conscious Life Expo, I'm not sure. But where he said emphatically, now this is getting back into the abduction phenomenon, or the contactee phenomenon, let's just say. Right. He said that he believed that if a person has had one recalled abduction encounter, then they have been abducted multiple times, whether they realize it or not. And he calls them lifers. That always stuck with me. I'd love to get your thoughts on that. In other words, you may just be recalling one that you think is isolated, but chances are, and I want to get into Carla Turner, who you wrote about in your UFOs and the National Security State, beautiful book, Volume 2, being perhaps a lifer. But what are your thoughts on that?
I think there's a lot to it. I don't know if every single abductee can say that they're a lifer. Is Travis Walton a lifer? Travis Walton, in my opinion, is one of the best possible one-offs that I can think of in terms of abductions. I don't know that Travis has had any other subsequent abduction experiences. If so, he's never talked about them.
Or maybe he doesn't realize. Maybe he's not aware. That's the other thing.
It's supposed, but I've never been comfortable with the argument that, well, it's, you have no way of knowing, but it's probably true. Like, well, okay, what do I do with that? It is definitely a real possibility that a large number of abductees are multiple abductees. Certainly, a certain proportion of them are. I don't know what the free data has to say on this yet, but I mean, I would think that a large number of people who've had abduction experiences are very likely multiple abductees. Whether it's 90%, 50%, I couldn't say. I mean, I personally would not be comfortable without some information to say that it's everyone. Just maybe if that's what Grant was saying. But I do think, realistically, that if they're interested in you once, they're probably interested in you again, because first of all, an implant alone would indicate ongoing monitoring and tracking. So you probably be multiple abductee if you've got an implant. And here's been a theory that I've had for a long time. So if I were a super intelligent telepathic alien looking at the mass of humanity, and I would maybe not consider all humans of equal interest to me. I would maybe be more interested in those humans who have certain psychic abilities, actually. I mean, I would be. If I were an alien with psychic capabilities, I would think, oh, this human's not really very switched on psychically, but that one is. Let's take a look at her. And then you study her. I mean, that would make her more interesting from a scientific point of view. And so, and maybe it's not psychic capabilities. Maybe it's physiological capabilities or some other kind of mental capability that we're not even thinking about that they can identify. There might be certain identifiers and markers about certain people. We talk about bloodlines. Maybe there's something to that. I don't know. But there might be reasons that they would come back to someone multiple times.
Right. Well, this may be a good time to bring in Carla Turner. That's a name that's been pretty well proliferated throughout the UFO circle, I believe.
She died way too young and too long ago. And
yeah. How long? When did she pass? Actually,
mid-90s. I think 96.
Has it been that long? Wow. Okay.
So a little over 20 years, and I never got the opportunity to meet her. I know a few colleagues now who knew Carla when she was active. There's a couple of YouTube videos of her out there, or maybe at least one.
I think I've seen one. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that might be the one. And she has a number of books out. That I think 4 books, if I'm not mistaken. And the thing about Carla Turner, she had a PhD in I think it was like medieval literature or something like that. She was but got involved. She had her own abduction experiences and started a kind of local circle. She was living in Texas, I believe, and met up with a lot of people, mostly women, who had similar experiences. And a number of those women describe what were crystal clear military abduction.
Myabs, right. You mentioned that in your book. Yes.
Yeah. And so that's how she was really, I think she was probably the first person to really bring up the Myab phenomenon as a major thing. A couple of other researchers followed quickly on after that. A guy named Helmut Lammer wrote a pretty interesting book on Myabs. And there hasn't been too much written about the Myab phenomenon. I know one person who is an apparent Myab victim who I have been encouraging for some time to write a book on it, and I don't know if that will ever happen, but I hope it, because this is a good person to do it. But there's definitely I think this is a thing. Like how deep, how widespread it is something I couldn't say. But there are enough. There's enough memories from abductees of military type people with non-human, we'll call them aliens. This has come up in some famous cases and in many cases that are not famous, where people will recall this type of a thing. So that's one thing. And then there are a few cases of individuals where they've talked very explicitly about having been, taken by a military group. Maybe one of the best early ones is Melinda Leslie, who Melinda's still around and in this field, and she, at least in the past, used to talk pretty explicitly about her Myab experiences. So the idea is that you've got a black budget, very clandestine group within the U.S. military, in this case, and they are following the abduction phenomenon. And I think one of the key ideas about this is that if they think that you're an abductee, they will want to know, like as a form of counterintelligence, what happened in your experience. They want to know, what were the aliens like? What did they say? What did they do? Right. And this is one theme of the Myab phenomenon. There very well may be other themes, other purposes of the Myab phenomenon. I've wondered for some time, are they actually taking people to have them do work for them? And doing whatever kind of memory management, brain wiping that they can employ with chemicals and hypnosis. I've never gotten proof of this, so it's hard for me to say like I know this is happening, but I do wonder. I haven't heard much lately about Myab allegations from people, or at least that I've been able to like really super take seriously. But I wouldn't doubt that it's out there, but I haven't heard much about Myabs lately.
Maybe there's a new iteration. I mean, these things, it's like MK Ultra. Some say it's been defunct, and others say, it's just taken on another sort of hybrid. So who's to say?
Oh, MK Ultra can never be debunked. I mean, MK Ultra as a formal program ceased to exist actually way back in 1963, but that's only because they changed the name.
Right.
So there were other MK programs that followed. There was one called MK Delta, and there are a number of others, and then the whole thing was outed in the 1970s, but that doesn't mean that the U.S. government and military stopped mind control experiments. Good grief. Mm-hmm. They have gone so far beyond anything they were doing with MK Ultra. And And it's not all within military. Sometimes it's within, university contractors. And
Wow.
so
Really something.
the same with media control. That never ended either.
Yeah. Never. Just different iterations, I think, Richard
Different
Dolan.
and profound. It's more profound.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, listen, you've dropped a load on us today. This is more than I bargained for, but you know what? Bring the juice. I love it.
It's always fun having these chats with you. I really do enjoy them. And I guess the last thing I would say regarding abduction is it's contentious, but I would say that to someone who's really deeply skeptical about it, take some time actually and go into some of the more prominent cases. And it's easy to research a lot of them. You've got, going back to Betty and Barney Hill.
Of course.
You've got the Travis Walton case, which I still consider a very, very strong one. And then there's a lot that are less well known. There's a fascinating case going back to the 60s and 70s of Betty Andreas and Luca. Very interesting lady. And right on through the research of people like John Mack and now, people like Yvonne Smith and
Yvonne, yes, Zero, absolutely. I know Yvonne well. Yeah.
Yvonne's work is really superb
Absolutely.
in my view. She's written a number of very good books on the subject, and there's also
Chosen.
Barbara Lamb.
I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
And Kathleen Martin and Denise Stoner have also done some very good work on this. So there's very, very good current research being done on the abduction phenomenon, and now the free study I've got my hands on, but I need to read. So there's reason to take the abduction phenomenon seriously. Last thing that I'll just leave you with is everyone's got a different attitude on how serious and grave this is. Is this the most grave threat to humanity that we've ever faced? Dave Jacobs says yes. And other people will say yes. And I don't think that I say yes. I don't think that abductions is the most grave threat that we're dealing with of this entire UFO and UFO tech phenomenon. I think that there's worse things that we need to be worrying about. I'm not saying it's not important. I'm not saying that people who are being taken are I don't want to trivialize their experience, but I would say that we're dealing with issues that are of greater portent and seriousness, and even alien abductions, which is important, and which, I mean, I don't want to make light of it, because if this were ever, if and when disclosure happens, abductions are going to come out as a very prominent feature of this, and a very big problem for the various governments to deal with. People have been taken, this, and you haven't done a thing about it, and all of that's going to happen.
Right.
The fact is, I don't think governments have been able to do much about it. And so they're kind of helpless. But again, I think you want a greater threat to worry about, look at the future of AI and transhumanism. And I think that those are probably much more frightening when we look into the next 30, 50 years of our history.
Hear. Particularly taken together, they're frightening.
Right.
I think it's very difficult to put lines of demarcation, Richard, between any of these things. That's what's frightening. It's how they're somehow intertwined.
It's all coming together at once, isn't it? Like
everything.
I was talking with Tracy about this the other day. We were chatting, and it's like you've got, let's say there's a disclosure. I do think that there'll be some kind of crack in the secrecy wall in the next 20, 30 years. Everyone's predicting it's like tomorrow or next year or whatever. I don't think so, but I think it will happen in my lifetime. And at the same time, we're looking at the achievement of strong AI, post-singularity, computer intelligence, very possibly, as well as a breakthrough in genetic modifications of the human genome itself that'll achieve, some kind of ultra long-lasting life and immortality and all of this craziness, which I think is the scariest prospect I can imagine. And all coalescing at once, almost at the same time, aside from the environmental issues that are definitely here and are a problem on this planet, and aside from all the military issues that are getting worse and worse, not better, and all these other problems that are just, it's like the perfect storm.
It is a perfect storm.
And it's all happening together, and I can't, why is it happening together? That's the question that I wonder about. But that'll have to be for another time, I guess.
Cliffhanger. We're about to get on the other side of it. I'm going to just keep it positive. We are going to get on the other side of this tumult, and for the better.
Well, I think so too.
Yeah,
I think we're resilient enough that I think we'll make it, and
it's going to be tough.
Challenges.
It's going to be rocky, but
I believe so.
In the interim, as we close out, Tell us what you got coming up, Richard, because you're Mr. Frenetic. What's happening with you?
The biggest thing that's been going on is that we've created a new website, and I would love for people to know about it. I've got my traditional website, Richard Dolan Publishing, richarddolanpress.com, where I have my books and books by other authors I publish, and that's a very active site. But I've created richarddolanmembers.com, and it's I've thrown a lot of activity on there, blog postings, video, off-the-cuff audio and video, all types of things. And it's just basically for people to get kind of an inside look as to what I'm doing, not just in my professional world, but in my life. And it's very, very active, and it's been a very energizing thing. So working that website, Richard Dolan Members, has been a really, really beneficial thing. And I love the people who come to that site. It's like we've got our own little community, growing, very big community now.
That's fabulous.
So that's been one thing. I'm doing, as I mentioned earlier, a lecture on transhumanism for it's sold out, but they're doing video live stream so people can check it out. It's called the True Legends Conference. That's what it is, and that's in Branson, Missouri. And if you want the link to that, I guess you can Google it, or you can go to Richard Dolan Members, go to the events
I'll make
tab.
sure to have a link. Tell us the date again, the date?
September 16th, I think.
Okay.
That weekend, whatever. It's 14th to 16th, something like that. It's coming up.
We'll make sure to have that. I will be over in the UK, of course, filming some shows with some of our friends. But I'll be thinking of you, but we'll make sure to have a link. As a matter of fact, the show is going to air the day we fly over there, so that's great. Nice. And I have one last question in closing. When are you going to do this book on false flags? When is it going to be done? We did this interview. I'm going to yell at you a little bit there now. We did this interview on false flags back in 2016.
You know, it's funny. I started out in this field taking forever to write each book, and then I went through a period where I banged out a couple of long books really quickly.
Sure did.
After Disclosure, and then 21st Century Mind, and now I'm back to my traditional method apparently. So I've got the false flag book. It is on my front burner now, and I think probably early 2019 to be realistic.
Okay. I know a lot of people are looking forward
I want
to
it done. It's very important for me to get it done. I have a lot of good material that's written. I'm happy with it. I just need to kind of wrap it up.
Okay.
So I will.
Well, God willing, you will. Listen, what can I say, Mr. Dolan? Always, always, always a pleasure to have you
Same
on
here,
the
Alexis.
show and chatting with you and Tracy, and really excited to hang out with you guys. We got a couple of things. Maybe we'll be seeing each other. I think in October you're going to be in Vermont, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I won't.
You're not going to do that one?
No, sadly.
Oh.
I think that'll be a very nice event, but
Yeah.
no, I won't be able to attend that. So.
Okay. Well,
We'll have to
I
figure
think
it
Barbara Lamb is going to be there, and
Yes.
we're going to hopefully have a meet up there. But we'll be seeing each other. We'll be seeing
Probably
each other on the
wonderful.
circuit at some point. So once again, don't hang up. I'm just going to sign off for now and say, as always, thank you to the Journeyers for tuning into this episode of Higher Journeys. And thank you, Richard Dolan, once again for joining us.
Thank you.
Talk to y'all real soon. Take care.